So the Supreme Court just dropped a lot of really terrible rulings. One of which is effectively imposing a "don't say gay" regime on the entire country. The ruling uses...
Today is a day that ends in Y, so LGBT influencers are crashing out for no legitimate reason. We're going to break down the latest ridiculous outrage and meltdowns over a big Supreme Court case on LGBT indoctrination in schools, and so much more on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where we take on the craziest ideas across our media, the internet, and our politics, all from an independent perspective. Guys, I don't know how exactly this shot will come out, if you guys will like it any better than the corner yesterday. I'm still doing my best. I need to figure out what I'm going to do for a final studio setup in my new apartment. Bear with me. And just so you know, the reflection over my shoulder is the reflection of a ring light. It is not, in fact, a looming planet or sun about to crash into the Earth. Now, without me yapping about more nonsense, let's talk about our main story for today, which is the absolutely patently absurd online meltdown over a new Supreme Court ruling that requires opt-outs for LGBTQ educational lessons in public schools, consistent with parents' religious objections. Here's some reporting from CNN on the story as it broke.
The court sided with a group of religious Maryland parents who want the option to keep their elementary-age children out of lessons involving books with LGBTQ content. President Trump celebrated this as a win for the court's conservative majority.
It's really a ruling for parents. They lost control of the schools. They lost control of their child. And this is a tremendous victory for parents.
Now, before we get into the TikTok meltdowns, which are unhinged even by TikTok standards, I think we need to just square up about some of the facts of this case, and in particular, look at some of the books that were involved. So, as the Supreme Court explained in the opinion, which might shock you, I actually read, this all happened when, in 2022 to 2023, that academic school year, the Montgomery Board of Education in Maryland introduced so-called LGBTQ plus inclusive texts and rolled them out in lesson plans. Now, originally, they included an opt-out, a parental opt-out, which they already have for some other things, including, I think, their sex education courses, where parents could fill out a form and have their child not be present when these textbooks or texts were read to the class. And it's important to note, guys, that this was for very young children. This was specifically for kindergarten through 5th grade that these books were approved. And they originally did have this opt-out, but then they removed the opt-out option because so many people took it. So many parents requested that their children be opted out of this curriculum, which you'll understand why when you see it, that it became unworkable, so they ended the option altogether. As a result, a bunch of these religious parents sued. This included actually not just like traditional Christian evangelicals, but also Muslim parents, hence why the name of the case is Mahmoud et al. Versus Taylor, Mahmoud being a Muslim plaintiff. So it was a diverse coalition that sued, demanding opt-outs be reinstated, citing their religious freedom rights under the First Amendment, and the Supreme Court just issued a preliminary ruling in their favor. Now, unlike the people losing their crap on TikTok, I actually read the opinion and the dissent from Sonia Sotomayor, one of the liberal justices, and I was very intrigued to know what exactly was this LGBTQ plus inclusivity curriculum. Yes, it turns out it's progressive brainwashing propaganda. Shocker. This is my shocked face. So one of the books that was approved, again, for K through 5 education at this public school is called Intersectional Allies. We Make Room for All. The brainchild of 3 women of color sociologists, Intersectional Allies is a smooth, gleeful entry into intersectional feminism. The 9 interconnected characters proudly describe themselves and their backgrounds, involving topics that range from a physical disability to language brokering, offering an opportunity to take pride in a personal story and connect to collective struggle for justice. Yeah, that doesn't sound ideological or propagandistic at all that you want to push intersectional feminist ideology on kindergartners with a picture book. The Supreme Court opinion included some excerpts from this book that make it clear what we're dealing with here. Intersectional Allies includes a page-by-page book discussion guide that asserts, quote, "When we are born, our gender is often decided for us based on our sex, but at any point in our lives, we can choose to identify with one gender, multiple genders, or neither gender." The discussion guide explains that Kate, who is one of the 9 characters in this book and is a transgender child, the discussion guide explains that Kate prefers the pronouns they, their, them, and then asks the audience, which is impressionable young elementary school students, what pronouns fit you best? So we are not simply talking about books that mention a gay couple existing. We are explicitly talking about ideological propaganda, pushing confusing and incoherent and deeply controversial and ideological notions about gender and sex onto people as young as kindergartners in public schools on the taxpayer dime, and they weren't even allowing an opt-out. Yes. And here's the second book I want to take a look at. It's called Born Ready, The True Story of a Boy Named Penelope. And this book is by Jodi Patterson, activist and chair of the Human Rights Campaign Foundation board, who shares her transgender son's experience in this important picture book about identity and acceptance. Penelope knows that he's a boy and a ninja. The problem is getting everyone else to realize it. Again, this story is told from the perspective of Penelope, who at one point says, "If they would all stop and listen, I'd tell them about me. Inside, I'm a boy." When Penelope's mother later assures her that if you feel like a boy, that's okay, Penelope responds, "No, Mama, I don't feel like a boy. I am a boy." Penelope's mother then agrees that she is a boy, and Penelope says, "For the first time, my insides don't feel like fire. They feel like warm golden glove." Later, after the family starts treating Penelope as a boy, Penelope's brother complains that you can't become a boy, you have to be born one. This comment draws a rebuke from Penelope's mother. Quote, "Not everything needs to make sense. This is about love." Now, you might be wondering, maybe these texts were introduced as part of a curriculum where these ideas would be debated and discussed. Like this notion that young children really can have a gender identity. All of this is deeply ideological and controversial. But maybe a defense of it would be that, hey, they're just introducing these ideas and then they're going to discuss them and debate them potentially. But even then, K through 5, I don't really buy that. I could be convinced of that argument for high school or even late middle school potentially. And more importantly, resources that were included in the case make it quite clear that these were not lessons for discussion or debate. There was one message and one agenda, and then a wrong answer that teachers were instructed to shut down if students espoused it. Reading from the Supreme Court opinion here. The board also contemplated that instruction involving the LGBTQ plus inclusive storybooks would include classroom discussion. In anticipation of such discussion, the board hosted a professional development workshop in the summer of 2022, where it provided teachers with a guidance document suggesting how they might respond to student inquiries regarding the themes presented in the books. For example, if a student asserts that 2 men cannot get married, the guidance document encourages teachers to respond by saying, when people are adults, they can get married. 2 men who love each other can decide they want to get married. If a student claims that a character can't be a boy if he was born a girl, teachers were encouraged to respond, quote, "That comment is hurtful." And if a student asks, "What's transgender?" it was recommended that teachers explain, quote, "When we're born, people make a guess about our gender and label us boy or girl based on our body parts. Sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong." So to me, there's really no dispute that what we're dealing with here is ideological propaganda being pushed onto kids in public school classrooms at public school expense, and then parents not even having the option to opt out of it. The Supreme Court agrees that that is a unconstitutional infringement on their free exercise of their religion, because bringing up your children in a religious environment and your teachings is an important part of your religious freedom, and public schools are not supposed to be pushing a alternative religion on them. But you would think the Supreme Court had just banned gay people from existing in American public life from the reaction on TikTok and elsewhere to this decision that bordered on outright hysterical. We're going to take a look at the most crazy TikTok responses I found, including one from a teacher who I don't know how he's still employed after this. Artificial intelligence is the future, and video editing is no different. Today's sponsor, Opus Clip, is a pioneer in this space and turns 2 years old this June. I first encountered Opus Clip as the coolest cutting-edge AI video clipping service, but it's evolved into much more than just that. Now, Opus Clip is the leading AI growth tool for creators. Opus Clip now helps creators save time and stay consistent by automating their entire short-form video workflow. With the new auto import feature, Opus Clip can automatically pull in your latest YouTube videos and instantly auto edit your videos into social ready clips. You can also select specific playlists for smarter import control. And coming soon, the auto scheduler will allow you to bulk select clips and schedule them for when you're out of the office or on vacation, so your content keeps going live. This makes it easier than ever to stay active across multiple platforms with little effort. You can try out Opus Clip and even participate in their Clip the Future contest over the next month and get free credits or potentially even win a MacBook Pro up to $5,000 cash or other awesome prizes. Head to www.opus.pro/clip-the-future now to check it out. Okay, guys, let's take a look at the first delusional TikTok response to this Supreme Court ruling from an interesting individual who is a transgender woman.
So the Supreme Court just dropped a lot of really terrible rulings. One of which is effectively imposing a don't say gay regime on the entire country. The ruling uses religious freedom to require that parents be able to opt their kids out of lessons that involve books with queer people in them. Involve those books how exactly? Whatever's enough to make a bigot not like it, I suppose. They don't say. And that's on purpose. You might be wondering, are opt-outs really that bad? Yes, they are. This case exists in the first place because Montgomery County Public Schools could not keep up with the number of opt-out requests from bigoted parents and still be able to actually educate their students. So now, the only option left to schools like them will be to completely eliminate LGBT people from all their lessons. A problem that will only be exacerbated by the massive underfunding of schools and the vagueness of this ruling. This increases the already too high stigma and hatred and ostracization of LGBT people everywhere, all across the nation, but especially the queer kids at school. And it won't stop there, because the ruling creates a precedent that says religious freedom is a good enough reason to not allow schools to teach kids about people and things that just exist in the world, even when we know for a fact that doing so will cause harm to other groups, the kids in class, or society as a whole. This religious supremacy precedent could be used to ban teaching things like evolution, or the idea that women can be in the workforce, or probably that other religions exist, because we all know that the Supreme Court will ever find use for this precedent when it aligns with their religion. Trust me, this court will find a way to weasel out of standing by religious freedom when someone brings a case that their religion requires an opt-out for something that these zealots want to force your children to learn. These people don't care about consistency, they don't care about rule of law, and they don't care about protecting children. Their politics are just power and domination, and their only principle is f*** you.
Well, she seems stable. I mean, there's so many things wrong with what we just watched that I hardly know where to begin. I mean, the first being that don't say gay is not an accurate framing of this case. This doesn't refer to things that can be discussed, in class or in school buildings, just in general. It doesn't say that you can't even mention gay rights or gay people in history textbooks or in works of fiction. It's just specifically about lessons pushing LGBTQ plus inclusivity as a specific agenda item. And you would really think, and so that's not the same thing as don't say gay, it's really not. And you would kind of think, or if you were a thinking person at least, that is, that if you, in a community, received so many opt-out requests for your lesson plan that you literally could not manage them all, that might prompt some introspection that, like, maybe we're doing something wrong. maybe we're not serving our community well, the community that pays taxes, that runs this whole operation and funds us. But instead, with people like this, they just think, oh, in Maryland, there's a whole county full of bigots. No, maybe you're just doing weird stuff that is going too far. And the fact that so many people want to opt out of this is like a good sign that maybe you should not be doing it, or at least not in this form. And I don't understand how this person basically says, like, oh, they're banning teaching about this. They're banning teaching about it. Again, this is opt-out. They're not even banning teaching about this. And frankly, that would be defensible. We could have a whole nother conversation about that, but that would be defensible at this point for some of this stuff. And then this notion that, oh, well, stuff like this increases stigma for LGBTQ people across the nation. I just don't buy that. I don't believe that the fact that third graders in public schools won't be told that you can have they, them pronouns means I, as a gay person, will face more stigma, or even that a trans person out in the world will. I actually think, if anything, it might be the opposite, that otherwise tolerant people may become resentful of gay and trans people in general if they feel their kids are being brainwashed with unreasonable and ridiculous ideas by this community. And it wouldn't be fair to blame people like me for that, because of course we don't support it. Neither do a lot of like trans adults even, but that is kind of the way the human brain works. So if one of these things was going to increase stigma, it's not the opt-outs, it's the lack thereof. Like, seriously. And it's just, it's kind of telling that this person really thinks that these conservative Supreme Court justices, their whole ideology is just F you. Yeah, it couldn't be that they have just a different perspective on like deeply held principles and conflicting questions of constitutional law. No, they just must be evil people. Like, that's to me the sign of a very closed mind. Now, I want to watch another TikTok video from a very large, like, woke teacher on TikTok who basically, this response to this ruling is absolutely unhinged. Let's take a look at his video.
Pre-K pause, because parents, I'm about to piss you off right now because it looks like you'll be teaching in the fall. The Supreme Court said if you want to opt your child out of a lesson because it goes against your religion, that's totally fine. Totally agree. So send them to in private school. And here's another solution for you. If you want to opt your child out of a lesson I created because it goes against your bigotry, mind you, a lesson that is age appropriate and educational, then you can, wait for it, homeschool them. You can homeschool your child. Here's the thing you're not going to do, because if you had to spend 8 hours a day teaching your child like I do, you wouldn't do it, babes. Why is that? Because you don't know how to parent your own child, let alone teach them. And let's be so real, you don't use school as a place for them to get an education. You use it as childcare. But here's the thing, even if you don't homeschool them and don't send them to private school, I'm not teaching 2 different lessons, and I'm not coming up with 2 different lessons. So make sure come August, when you do your back to school shopping, go grab your Rose Art crayons, go get yourself a red Make America Great Again book bag, because you're going back to school. Because it's important to me that every student in my classroom is represented. So if a child is raised by their 2 dads or their grandparents or their 1 mom or they're immigrants, they are welcome in my classroom and they're going to learn about themselves. So if you don't like my scholarly sourced, age-appropriate, empathetic lessons out there, then you teach your own, okay? You teach your own. I'm a teacher and I'm a therapist, baby. I'm not a gymnast. I'm not bending for you. Anyway, school starts at 7:30 after Labor Day, so I'll see you there.
Hey, so that was unhinged. Now, I don't know if this guy is still a teacher or if he's a public school teacher or if he's gone just like full influencer mode instead and no longer actually teaches. I don't know. If he does teach, particularly in a public school, he should instantly be fired. He just suggested that like he in his classroom will defy the Supreme Court and continue in a practice that has been adjudged to basically violate people's First Amendment rights. No, you're a public servant. You work for the taxpayers. You don't get to violate their rights and brag about it on social media and keep your job. Like, that's diabolical to me. In the same way, this argument, well, then send your kids to private school or homeschool if you don't want them to learn about genderqueer 3-year-olds with they, them pronouns, is so annoying and so absurd. No, they have a right to access the public education that they are extensively taxed to fund without their religious freedom being violated by you pushing propaganda and not even letting them opt out. And they don't have to just pay twice for education. Oh yeah, also pay all these heavy taxes in Maryland and in your local communities or wherever in the country, and also pay private school tuition. A lot of people can't afford that, and they don't have to. Same with homeschooling. A lot of people can't afford to do that, and they don't have to. They are forced to pay for these public schools. So these public schools, and actually it's compulsory under Maryland state law to send your child to school. So then the schools have to actually serve them and accommodate their constitutional rights. And if you refuse to comply with the Constitution of the United States and our highest courts, you should not be employed by any branch of the United States government or its state governments or its local governments or anything of the sort. And I just thought this was totally unhinged and smug and condescending and really, really gives like LGBT a terrible name, this kind of perspective. Now, I do think one critic, Mercedes Chandler, who used to be MAGA, but I think is a outspoken liberal now, I thought she made an interesting, if slightly vulgar, point. Take a listen to this.
I believe that a parent should be able to opt out of a class, course, or curriculum that they think infringes on their freedom of religion. I believe that. MAGA, you don't believe that. Because yes, your child now can opt out of the storybook LGBTQ reading, that's fine. But your child's classmates have to stare at the 10 Commandments on the wall, and then the next day have to come in and start reading the goddamn Bible. I'm looking at you, Texas, I live here, and you Oklahoma. Okay, this is my problem with things like the Supreme Court ruling today, is because we get these continual protections for Christianity when we live in a nation that is freedom of religion, which means freedom from religion. And that is not being upheld. We have separation of church and state for a reason. So yes, if you get the right to say, you know what, I don't want my little Jimmy listening to the LGBTQ storybook, that is fine. But you should also agree with that his classmates should not have to be forced to stare at the 10 Commandments every day when they walk into that school. You should be okay with the fact that there's going to be children who should be allowed to opt out of Bible readings, but you don't want that. You want them to be forced to read the Bible. You want them to be forced to read the 10 Commandments while you opt your little Jimmy out of the classroom so that he doesn't have to listen to the God-forbidden LGBTQ storybook. That is my problem. It's the hypocrisy.
So thank you for all the F-bombs. I will have to edit out one by one there, Mercedes. And I don't necessarily agree with everything she said in this video, but I think she has a point in general that tolerance is a two-way street. So if you are a Christian or a traditionalist Muslim and you don't want your kids raised on, or taught this LGBTQ plus indoctrination in public schools, that's fine. I support you. But you should also agree that your religion shouldn't be pushed in the classroom either. And when we come to the 10 Commandments, when we come to Bibles being taught and introduced not in a neutral way or a historical way, but in a way that clearly pushes Christianity, you should also be against that for consistency's sake. And I imagine that actually a lot of my Republican or MAGA followers and listeners actually probably would be. But to the ones who aren't, I do think there is a hypocrisy there that you should reconsider. But what do you guys think? Can you believe the backlash the Supreme Court case is getting? It just seems like common sense to me, but I want to hear from y'all. Do let me know what you think in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe to this channel if you aren't yet. Do hit that like button while you're at it. Send in your voicemails with your woke horror stories or your personal life situations or questions for me that you might have. Anything you want my perspective on or my feedback on, send those in at the link in the description, and I might just listen to it this Friday for my Voicemail Friday episodes. Now, guys, we got to check in with Zohran Mamdani, the likely next mayor of New York City, who won the Democratic primary, beat out Andrew Cuomo, because he's such a flawed candidate, but has some really deeply radical ideas that are coming to light and I want to talk about. And this is a good example. So Zohran really is full socialist. Take a listen to what he said about billionaires.
You are a self-described democratic socialist. Do you think that billionaires have a right to exist?
I don't think that we should have billionaires because, frankly, it is so much money in a moment of such inequality. And ultimately, what we need more of is equality across our city and across our state and across our country. And I look forward to work with everyone, including billionaires, to make a city that is fairer for all of them.
What? How comical is it to say billionaires shouldn't exist, and I look forward to working with billionaires to build a better New York City when I'm mayor. What? You think they're going to want to work with you when you don't think they should exist? That would be like a politician saying, I don't think YouTubers should exist, and I'm going to ban YouTube. And I look forward to working with YouTubers when I take office. Like, we're not going to work with you. We're going to oppose you. And if you win, we're going to relocate. So that was just a bizarre kind of hypocrisy there, or inconsistency there for me. And it gets at the broader problem that, listen, I can understand why people are envious of billionaires and the massive wealth that they enjoy, but trying to destroy their existence through socialist policies in New York City is only going to encourage them to relocate out of New York City and take their tax revenue, their spending, and all the economic contributions they provide, and their businesses in some cases, with them. So here's some reporting from Olivia Reingold over at the Free Press about billionaires already telling her they're getting out of town if Zohran becomes New York City's next mayor. Take a listen to her.
Right now, there are so many people on Twitter angry with me because of my latest story on Zohran Mamdani. For the past week, I have been speaking with billionaires for the Free Press about what they would do if Zohran Mamdani, a 33-year-old socialist, becomes the next mayor of New York City. And many of them told me that they would consider just leaving and maybe even closing down their businesses. That is what the CEO and owner of Gristetti's, the local supermarket chain in Manhattan, said. So on Twitter, I'm getting so many replies because it's all people celebrating, saying, good, leave. We don't want billionaires here. The problem with that is that Zohran's agenda is very, very expensive. His housing plan alone would cost $100 billion. The size of the city's entire budget is $110 billion, to give you some scale. Zohran's plans hinge upon the ability to hike up taxes on the 1% on corporations, but what he's failing to consider is what if they just leave? Because several billionaires this week told me they would consider that.
So I think this is the most obvious counter-argument against Zohran's plan to eliminate billionaires in New York City or whatever, that it will work, just not in the way he wants it to work. Like, he envisions a scenario where he can take all their money and redistribute it to his socialist ends and help the people. In reality, they're just going to leave. And the portion of their money in the economic activity that already was being contributed to the city and its people will go with them, especially because, I mean, you can use accountancy and tricks and loops in the tax code to still like live somewhere for 5.5 months out of the year, but technically you live somewhere else for 6.5 months. So that's where you pay your taxes. You can do business in other places. Like, there's so many ways to get around this. They wouldn't even have to entirely abandon New York City to do it. Now, the other problem there is that this would really, any sort of punitive policy designed to destroy billionaires would destroy incentives as well for them to continue to work and produce or invest and expand companies past a certain point, and would have all sorts of economic impacts that are harmful for people. And it's all based on, I think, a fundamentally flawed premise that we need to obsess about income inequality. I actually think that's truly secondary. And what matters is people's objective living standards, not arbitrary comparisons to other people. Like with a lot of these billionaires, for example, their wealth is mostly in stocks and in the value of the companies that they own. And so their wealth massively fluctuates with the stock market. And depending on when you measure it, inequality may be way more severe one day, you know, the wealth of one of these billionaires versus the average New Yorker, versus a few weeks later, if the stock market goes down a lot and they lose all this wealth, inequality is, if you measured it that day, much lower. In reality, like, your life hasn't changed. Your life is not worse or better, even though inequality metrics would be totally different. There is something to be said about inequality in terms of like the people in your life around you not having some effect socially and economically. I'm not saying it's totally insignificant, but the idea that you are worse off because some other person, like one individual billionaire, has a lot of money is just not true. It doesn't affect your life. And if anything, oftentimes, I'm not saying all billionaires are good. There's certainly bad ways to become a billionaire, but oftentimes someone becomes a billionaire, look at Jeff Bezos, for doing something amazing for society, for creating untold thousands or if even millions indirectly of jobs and tremendous value for people who use the services every day. And so, yeah, sure, he made a ton of money, but if anything, the wealth he contributed to all of society is exponentially greater. And the huge amount of tax revenue that his companies, and I'm sure him personally, have put it back into the economy and local governments is massive as well. Also, it just fundamentally comes down to kind of a question of human freedom for me. Like, I really don't think the government should be able to decide how much money people are allowed to earn or have. Like, no. Set up rules that are fair so they can't hurt other people while they're, enriching themselves. But beyond that, if people keep succeeding past a certain point, the government shouldn't be like, no, you can't. We don't allow that to exist. And they would do this through like a 90% top marginal income tax rate or a massive wealth tax or something like that. And so what would happen is nobody's going to keep working once they hit that tax rate. Nobody's going to keep investing once they hit this punitively high tax rate. So it's just the economic activity past that point won't occur. And they want us to believe that we'll all be better off. I just don't buy it. Now, the strongest argument that I've heard against billionaires, at least on the surface, is that we can't allow in a democratic society individuals to have the amount of power that a billionaire has because they can influence our politics with all their money and what have you. And I'm skeptical of concentrated power, mainly in the government, but also in individuals and in private institutions. So that is compelling to me on the surface. But I guess I would say a government powerful enough to prevent billionaires existing is already a bigger problem than any individual billionaire. And are they even that powerful? Can they really control and dominate our politics? I don't think so. First and foremost, because there are billionaires and super wealthy people on either side of the aisle funding causes to both extremes. So they're in competition with each other, and clearly neither just gets whatever they want. I mean, look at Elon Musk. He is currently crashing out right now and attacking Trump and attacking Republicans because they're passing a massive budget bill that he doesn't like and he's unhappy with after he funded all their campaigns and gave them so much money and supported them. And they were like, nah, we're not doing what you want. We're going to do what we think we need to do. So I just don't accept this idea that like money is everything in politics and the rich people control all our political system. If that was true, Michael Bloomberg would have been the Democratic nominee in 2020, right? Like he came in, he injected himself in and spent all this money and then it didn't get the nomination. It's just money in politics is not a non-existent thing, but it's vastly overhyped because at the end of the day, people care about votes from voters. I just don't buy that. I think it's probably the most compelling argument they have, but I just, it still doesn't work for me. Now, still, I will say that I'm really concerned by Zohran, especially because it's not just, him wanting billionaires to not exist. He's a full-out Marxist. He's a communist. I mean, listen to this clip of him saying so, that explicitly their goal is to seize the means of production, which is like just straight out of definition of what Marxism is. Take a listen to this.
What the purpose is about this entire project, it's not simply to raise class consciousness, but to win socialism. And obviously raising class consciousness is a critical part of that. But making sure that we have candidates that both understand that and are willing to put that forward at every which moment that they have, at every which opportunity that they're given. We have to continue to elect more socialists. And we have to ensure that we are unapologetic about our socialism. There are also other issues that we firmly believe in, whether it's BDS, right, or whether it's the end goal of seizing the means of production, where we do not have the same level of support at this very moment. And what I want to say is that it is critical that in the way that we organize, in the way that we set up our work and our priorities, that we do not leave any one issue for the other, that we do not meet a moment and only look at what people are ready for, but that we are doing both of these things in tandem, because it is critical for us to both meet people where they're at and to also organize for what is correct and for what is right, and to ensure that over time we can bring people to that issue.
So we're not talking about a social democrat here or some like liberal who just wants a little more taxes, a little more regulation, a little more redistribution of wealth. No, we're talking about a Marxist. We're talking about somebody who openly supports one of the most destructive ideologies in human history that cost untold millions of lives and devastation in the 20th century. That is concerning. I really don't think anyone with those views should be anywhere near political power. I just don't. And that all of that criticism is entirely legitimate against him. But you know what's not, though? Like the weird and vaguely racist things that people are nitpicking him over. For example, he's getting attacked right now, including by elected Republican politicians, for daring to eat rice with his hands during an interview. Let's take a look at the clip.
So the third holy grail of taboos in American politics, you have socialism, you have Islam, and then you have Palestine. And you are really going for the trifecta.
Let's go, baby.
Let's go. Tell me, why is Palestine a part of your politics?
When you grow up as someone, especially in the third world, you have a very different understanding of the Palestinian struggle.
So this clip was shared by the End Wokeness account that says, Zohran says his worldview is inspired by the third world while eating rice with his hands. And it was clearly kind of shared with the idea that it is bad to do this or it is crazy. And I do find it kind of funny that an End Wokeness account is like so offended by the manner in which someone consumes rice. But I digress. The Republican Congressman Brandon Gill saw this video and tweeted, civilized people in America don't eat like this. If you refuse to adopt Western customs, go back to the third world. Sir, I would like to humbly suggest that you calm down. It is really not that deep. It is really not that important. Like, who actually gives a shit if someone eats rice with their hands? That's not something I would do. It's a little odd, I guess, but how is that significant? And how is it like so much worse than all the food that we Americans regularly in American society eat with our hands? Like, you're telling me it's worse to eat rice with your hands, sticky rice, than it is to like eat ribs that'll get you all sticky and messy, or pizza and your hands will get all greasy. If like hygiene is the concern, I just don't see that. And it is weird because you're like suggesting that he leave the country over the way he eats a certain food in one random clip. Like, it's just not that deep. And there's something about it that's vaguely comes off as racist. I'm just telling you, it does. Now, I will, and also I just think it's a waste of time. Like, this is the guy who says we need to defund the police for queer liberation. This is the guy who is an open Marxist who wants to seize the means of production. And y'all can't do better than this. Y'all, seriously, this is what Republicans are. I mean, not all of them, but some of them are wasting energy on. It's just stupid and dumb. And obviously, now, if you wanted to make a more serious critique of Zohran in this clip, again, who cares? But if you wanted to, what you could actually point out is that he's kind of cosplaying, like he's eating this with his hands because apparently that's what they do in some other nations. And he claims that, he grew up in the third world, but he had extraordinarily, successful and affluent parents. And he came to America at like age 7. So he's almost like cosplaying and leaning into this in a way that's not authentic. Maybe that would be a more legitimate critique, but just acting like he's some savage subhuman because he dared eat rice with his hands, even though that's a thing people do in a lot of the world and it's really not that deep, is just totally tone deaf and bizarre to me and incredibly lame. But what do you guys think? Do you stay up at night because somewhere a socialist politician is eating rice with his hands? Let me know in the comments. Please do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Do hit that like button before you go. And that'll be it for today's episode of the Brad versus Everyone podcast. I had more I wanted to get to, but we ran over time, and I guess we'll be back at it tomorrow. So with that, guys, we'll talk again real soon.